Hi there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about movies, music, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new debut album from A.S.A.P. Ferg titled Trap Lord. Now, here's something that you might not know. The term trap, often heard in rap and electronica, is significantly different in both these genres than you might think. You see, in electronica and dubstep, trap tended to refer to a specific type of instrumentation, complete with accelerating 808 drums, an excess of hi-hats, menacing string sections, and moody, darker layers of synthesizers. Now, I'll admit right out of the gate that I'm not the biggest fan of this particular musical style, but I can definitely see its appeal, particularly when balanced out with the right lyrics. After all, cold, bleak minimalism can work if you're a performer with enough charisma or force of personality to actually back it up. Unfortunately, the definition of trap instrumentation is very different than what is typically considered trap lyrics, which uses the term much more literally as a reference to the trapped lifestyles that many rappers struggle to escape, the traps created thanks to poverty, societal inequalities, and other such problems. And to be fair, the places where trap instrumentation and trap lyrics are balanced out can lead to some compelling symmetry and cohesion within the song. Now granted, it won't be much of my thing. To me, too much trap music goes for bombast over grit, which loses some of the actual texture of the song, but I can appreciate it when it works. The problem though, as one could easily say if looking at the Billboard Hot 100, is that this symmetry between trap instrumentation and lyrics rarely gets popular in a big way on the charts. Instead, many producers and rappers have co-opted the trap aesthetic and instrumentation in order to build their conventional rap songs about money, cars, and hoes. And believe me, for more often than not, it just doesn't work at all. This is actually for a fairly simple reason, believe it or not. It's hard to glamorize a lifestyle as attractive to the mainstream audience if you pair it with production and instrumentation that is bleak, dark, and makes it seem like the artist isn't having any fun. It makes the songs come across as astoundingly soulless to me, and often far darker than I suspect that the artist intended. And sure, it would be one thing if the rappers are looking to satirize their lives of partying and paint them as hollow or token, but it's clear that's more often than not they're being entirely sincere about it, and that's just the wrong direction to take. And this isn't me coming down against vapid hip-hop either. When placed in the right context, superficial themes in hip-hop can work just fine. Hell, this is coming from the guy who will defend crunk more than the majority of critics. As I mentioned before, there's a place for shallow hedonistic material, and while it may be indulgent, vacuous, vapid, or dumb as hell, it can occasionally be rather entertaining nonetheless. The problem here doesn't come from the luxury raps themselves, but the placement of said raps against a dour, humorless instrumentation that sucks away the possibilities of fun or awesome bombast and energy. And so with all that in mind, what could I hope to expect from A$AP Ferg, whose debut album is titled Trap Lord? I've heard interesting things about the guy from the underground, but I know exactly how much pressure to conform with the mainstream has ruined all too many rappers who had any sort of underground street cred. And while A$AP Ferg didn't really have that, and while I wasn't really entirely familiar with his mixtapes outside of the disastrous A$AP Mob mixtape, I was a little encouraged that he somehow managed to dredge up Bone Thugs and Harmony from wherever they were and pull them onto an album. It couldn't be that bad, right? Ugh. Well, while I wouldn't call A$AP Ferg's Trap Lord the worst album that I've listened through this year, it definitely has flaws in all the places I expected. Although, to be fair to the guy, it's an improvement over his performance on the A$AP Mob mixtape Lords Never Worry, and does showcase points where A$AP Ferg might indeed develop into a decent rapper in the future. But as of this album, okay, I need to get this out of the way quickly before I go through the rest of the review. A$AP Ferg is not a good lyricist. In fact, I'd argue he alternates between being pretty bland to pretty embarrassing. This is not referring to his flow, mind you. In fact, I make the argument that his biggest improvements since his mixtape have been his technical rhyming skills. But his lyrics leave a lot to be desired, because honestly, if you're making a lot of puns based off of your name that Fergie from the Black Eyed Peas already made in 2006, you're not doing yourself any favors. And look, I get that there's a certain shallowness to be expected as part of this genre, but at least he could have taken his lyrics in interesting directions or been more creative, or at least not just repeated the same junk we've heard time and time again for years now. The one point I'll give an A$AP Ferg's favor is that he occasionally pulls out some African-American-centric pop culture references that I genuinely didn't recognize, and it added some flavor to his material. On top of that, he repeated references to church and gospel themes, which isn't entirely unique, but does have a certain degree of symmetry when compared with his instrumentation, which occasionally works a lot better than it really should. Now, this is mostly because A$AP Ferg's instrumentation is entirely trap with stronger hints of more gothic elements. Now, as a fan of gothic music in general, I can appreciate this, and I do like that his lyrics at least go far enough to mostly fit with the tone. And even though it did catch me off guard at first, I did warm to the use of echoes smothering his backing vocals, as I found it a fair bit for the atmosphere of the track. But this breaks apart at a few points, the biggest being the quality of instrumentation and production is just lousy. There's no baroque scope or epic sweep or anything remotely close to impactful, and the lack of richer instrumentation makes the backbeats come across as more than a little cheap. And when balanced out against A$AP Ferg spitting as hard and fast as he can, the instrumentation is distinctly underwhelming. And that's when he's actually trying. More often than not, the beats sound like the same pre-processed trap music we've been treated to for the past year, and none of it fits well with the money cash hose anthems that A$AP Ferg is trying to sell. Now, I'll say this in his favor. While I'm not the biggest fan of his higher range, I do respect the fact that A$AP Ferg is rhyming a little bit faster and spitting with some real intensity. And while I have a really hard time buying any emotional authenticity from his lower, more soulful range, I can give him credit for at least attempting to fit the mood constructed by his instrumentation. But in either range, I have a hard time distinguishing much of a personality surrounding A$AP Ferg beyond the stereotypical cliches. And really, his guest stars don't help him here, because on every track they show up, I get the feeling that A$AP Ferg is attempting to sound like them instead of building his own personality. Sure, it's better for the track's flow, but this is a debut where he's supposed to show what he is to the world, not copy a succession of rappers for better or for worse. That being said, I did quite like the track Lords featuring Bone Thugs and Harmony, and I'll admit it's impressive to see that A$AP Ferg can spit up to their level. He still can't quite cut it, but then again, very few people actually can. But on the flip side, we get songs like Work Remix and Murda Someone, which feature acts like Waka Flocka Flame and French Montana, neither of whom you really want to emulate because they're terrible rappers. But even on his solo tracks, I find A$AP Ferg lacking in lyrical presence to really stand out for me. People have occasionally called him a young 50 Cent, and I'm not sure I quite buy that. A$AP Ferg might have better flow than 50 Cent, but significantly less creativity in his lyrics, and that's where it really counts. And yet, I see elements that could allow A$AP Ferg to stand out a bit more if he had bothered to flesh out his ideas. Take the whole gospel religion element he repeatedly cites. If he had bothered to push on that element, had a bit more focus, he could have made songs like Hood Pope have real impact. But instead, he opts to undercut these themes at every turn with the traditional money cash hose chorus or verses, and I don't buy he's doing it ironically to make a point. The one place where A$AP Ferg does go the extra mile is on Cocaine Castle, which drives straight into the crack house addiction with fearless abandon, complete with samples of women sobbing and chilling instrumentation. It's definitely unsettling, but it's the most real track on the album, and it shows that A$AP Ferg does have the potential to be better. But outside of Cocaine Castle and Lords, I really can't recommend this album. Look, if you like trap music or trap lyricism, there are more interesting and better articulating acts than A$AP Ferg. He mentioned in an interview that this album was originally intended as a mixtape, and I do buy that. It certainly has that lack of polish and amateurish production that you might find on the edges of the underground scene, but even by that standard, it's far from good. A$AP Ferg, you might be the second member of A$AP Mob to get a full debut, but this isn't a great start. So I've got a few more reviews on the pipe. It's going to be a busy end of the month. See you next time.